Hi, so this presentation is intended for a conference, for example, focusing on the intersection of artificial intelligence and peace building and looking at how we can incorporate the two to actually create a novel kind of substance and model, actually. And this is intended for anybody to kind of sit in at a conference, understand, learn, and grasp the various different concepts of artificial intelligence that can be applied to peace building. So this is more of a kind of DIY, listen along and actually execute on what I'm saying. So somebody could probably take this workshop and ideally turn an artificial intelligence model into something related to peace building. So these are kind of all the different processes that will be happening. And it's a common misconception. Artificial intelligence and peace don't go together, when in fact they actually do. I think peace can be applied to so many different things in this planet. And it's really important to especially look at the niche areas, in particular artificial intelligence, that is so prominent in today's world with so many different actual use cases. And as you can imagine, we can actually craft artificial intelligence in a specific way that means we can have physical visualizations for peace promotion, and really in particular targeting the methods that maybe we haven't even thought about before. So looking at maybe generating a model that will target specific conflict hotspots that mean we can deploy these different techniques there, as an example. And so this is where a very key example of artificial intelligence comes along. This is just a case study, just to kind of set the scene, look at the overview, and to really understand kind of the intention of this. So a very key example in which artificial intelligence was used for peace building was actually for a project that offered real-time information on political occurrences happening worldwide. So this is where an artificial intelligence model was made, and they wanted to target specifically all of the different hotspots in the world where there were areas of like potential conflict outbreaks. And that meant that model could actually assist policymakers directly in the sense of us actually addressing these different threats and maybe even preventing conflicts from happening by installing different ambassadors or different protectors in those areas in specific war zones like Yemen to promote these different inclusivities. And that's where they'd used AI-assisted digital talks. So there'd be these different, imagine like a hologram, for example, of, a peacemaker perhaps coming in and talking about ways in which we can actually facilitate the prevention of different conflict. And then having that built with artificial intelligence and then placed in these different hotspots and maybe shown to world leaders in those areas, for example. And that is translated using these machine learning techniques and then projected visually. So alongside actually using this machine learning and artificial intelligence tool, it meant that people could sit, especially those non-technical people, which is a large majority of this world, because artificial intelligence is quite novel and it's important to include the non-technical side too, and ensuring that there's visualizations present so that anyone could understand what was going on. And that meant that the United Nations could then engage civilians in war zones with these large-scale digital dialogues, because it could be simply as a projection on a screen for everyone to sit and to understand these different concepts. And so this is something that's really, really important with artificial intelligence. But then begs the question, what is machine learning? Again, as I said, it's important to make everything simplistic, so we're going to go quite in depth into what machine learning is simply, because artificial intelligence is a very novel concept. And if you don't have the necessary computing skills or the technological ideas, it can be difficult to understand. But from a baseline, the concepts are pretty simple and anyone can understand them if they just put their mind to it or if they're explained well. And then how can we use those machine learning tools to create our own peace building models? We're going to kind of underline all of these in the workshop. So by definition, the word machine learning, it's quite literally what it sounds like. You're basically teaching a machine how to build predictions. And in this way, we can do it through actually providing and sourcing the data into these artificial intelligence models and then generating an output that will contribute towards the goal that you want to achieve. So in this case, peace building. And so machine learning is a section of artificial intelligence. There's quite a few branches. If we think about artificial intelligence, it is intelligence, just like how humans have intelligence, but in the form of something that is created by us. So it's artificial. It's not necessarily fake, but it's more kind of built for machines. So not necessarily a natural thing, because ours would be natural human intelligence. In this case, we're looking at giving intelligence to machines and then seeing how they can actually take the data we provide to them. We have to train them to then make predictions without using a lot of programming. So it's a lot more simplistic in terms of tools. And so there's a very kind of succinct number of steps that you can take through this. And I wanted to outline this visually so you can exactly see how to build it if you were to do it by yourself. The concept is that this workshop should give you the basis to take these steps and do it yourself in specific models that you want to understand. So the first one is looking at the idea of scope identification. So you need to figure out exactly what you want to focus on, because we can't focus on absolutely everything to do with peace building. Then collecting your data, and then pre-processing it, because in order to go into a machine, you need to have it slightly kind of cleaned up in a way so that the machine can understand it. And then using machine learning tools to input this data, off the back of that, developing a model, and then evaluating and iterating it. So these are like the key 6 concepts if you were to build a model from scratch. And so the first thing, naturally, is to identify your scope. As with anything, having a niche and having a more narrow idea and concept is going to be the most effective in terms of building absolutely anything. So identifying your scope of model in relation to peace building is the key thing. So it's more focusing on what sort of sections of peace building do you want it to be on. Do you want things like conflict resolution, or speaking directly to these world leaders to generate peace? Or is it more of an inner peace type of thing? And of course, you need to think about what the purpose of this model will be, who will actually be your target audience, who's going to sit and use this model, or would it be yourself if it's like a self peace building? And how is it going to directly contribute? So is it like an inner peace thing or a more global scale piece? And how would you quantify this? So how would you say, once somebody has used this model, how can they identify that this model has actually worked for them? And naturally, with the rise of artificial intelligence and the lack of laws relating to AI, because it's a concept that we're still fighting to understand today, what sort of ethical considerations would you require when you're actually going to be crafting your model? This is something that's really essential, because you might make something so incredible and then you notice that actually it violates some laws in some parts of the world. So you have to make sure that depending on where you're kind of distributing and executing this, you have to be in line with everything ethically. And here's some kind of sample ideas for brainstorming. It's nice to have examples and to see where everything could be put into place. So one key example could be analyzing historical conflict data and then using that to craft an analysis of where potential hotspots could arise. So there's a paper which I've linked in the references section by Braque, and this kind of researcher basically took 600 years of human data and then actually turned it into a scientific paper for people to access. So you could use that as a knowledge base in a data generation section and input that into artificial intelligence and say, this is what I want to craft. So we can use that conflict data to allow the machine to predict where the next conflicts might happen, as opposed to kind of maybe events surrounding a conflict. So this is something that's like a prediction tool to see how we can prevent any sort of conflict. Another idea could be a model that will craft peace building interventions that's based specifically on conflict that you're inputting. So the first one would be to predict where conflicts would happen. The second one could look at perhaps actually crafting these different interventions directly and saying, this is where, the issues lie. And then another important kind of concept is looking at social media and seeing how we can use content creation to mediate conflict, since people will post often politically, often their views, since they have, the freedom of being able to speak out about it on social media platforms. So it could be a really important concept to actually target those and see where people are kind of speaking most about different topics and how we could mediate it by providing more knowledge in those different areas of conflict. And then a final idea could be to actually partner with an academic institution all these different tech companies to generate a hyper-specific model for one type of conflict or a marginalized community. So these are like hyper-specific ideas that can be taken on further potentially. And to my knowledge, there's actually not ideas currently generated of these. There are some scientific papers, as I've kind of added in the references section, but these are all quite novel. So somebody could make this and actually turn it into something very, very useful. Then, of course, the second step is data collection. You must input the data into this AI model because artificial intelligence might seem like it knows absolutely everything. Imagine like ChatGPT, but without prompting it and asking it questions and sending through the relevant data, we cannot train a model without this. So you really need to have a good and a strong amount of data to allow the machine learning model to take all of it, to learn from it, quite literally to gain intelligence from it, and then to make accurate predictions of what's next. So important kind of areas of data sourcing could be through news articles, scientific journals, NGO data, especially those that work directly in these communities or in areas of conflict, or again, in a piece, it could be applied to any section, and then institution data. So the wider variety of data you have, the better. And in terms of where to source this data from, I've provided some links directly onto the PowerPoint. So looking at maybe armed conflict location and event data if you want specific areas of conflict, international terrorism data, Peace Research Institute, specifically those in Stockholm. If you were kind of looking on the more conflict side of things, I will also add stuff into the references section to look at inner peace too. And then looking directly at Peacebuilding could be the Social Change Initiative, Resources for Peace Project, and then United States Institute of Peace. So the more kind of variety and the more solid and quality data you have, the better that the model will be towards the end. And how to actually collect this data, because you can collect it, but if you don't collect it in the correct manner and correct setting, it's going to be very difficult to input it into the machine learning tool. So the first step would be to actually understand the data you need. So make a kind of scope identifier, figure out exactly what you're going to be focusing on, and then seeing where you need to focus your line of data with. Artificial intelligence tools like ChatGPT and Claude AI could be used to help you generate more specific ideas in terms of data collection and what you actually need. That would be the kind of easy way out of it. But if you wanted to do it a little bit more kind of hardcore, then you'd have to sit and think about exactly what you want to collect, then turning that into just a simple document that just has the requirements, maybe a table of the different sections, or literally just a Word document that has the source, the type of data, project significance, and including all of the different URLs, so all of the links, so that the tool can then search the websites and extract all the data it needs. And if there's ways that you've collected this data, for example, literally going onto websites and scraping information and copying and pasting links, looking at journals, speaking to people as well, it's really important to actually state the method, because you can use data in which you go and live speak to somebody or watch a video, but it's important that you note that down so that machine learning tool is aware of essentially how you got it, and making sure that all the data is kept in compliance with everything to do with all the legal requirements. Like I said, it's really, really important that it's all in line with that. And you can find quite a few data links to legal requirements in the kind of references section, or also just through a simple Google search. And then once you've collected this data, it's really important to ensure that you're getting it to a high standard, because the higher quality your data, the more kind of scientific or the more kind of research-based you're generating this data, the better your analysis will be, since the machine learning tool is going to take the knowledge and turn it into something else. It's really important that the initial knowledge is a very high standard so that the output will be even better. So the ways you can kind of minimize bad data could be to ensure you use multiple sources. So not only citing news articles and opinion pieces, but going more academic, because there's a lot of research currently undergoing in this section. Looking at quantitative data with qualitative ones. So it could be things like actual numbers in terms of generation of different maybe conflict data, and then also pairing that with maybe personal narratives too. So looking at both ideas to ensure you have a well-rounded piece. And then comparing data across a wide variety of databases, making sure you have the most accurate, up-to-date information, looking at dates and when things were published, and then looking at the idea of balanced sampling to make sure that you have all of the stories covered and you're not just focusing on one conflict on one person's perspective, but you're looking at kind of every angle possible for a particular conflict or idea related to peace building. And then once you have your data kind of secured, naturally you need to process it properly, since there's really just no easy way for a machine to pick up just a jumble of data that doesn't make any sense to you, let alone to the machine. So it's important to have everything categorized and pre-processed and cleaned, essentially. So the steps you take for this is cleansing your data, aggregating it, labeling it, and then transforming it. So this will very much vary depending on what sort of model you're going to produce, but this can be kind of done with a Google search as well, or using other different tools available to do this for you. You can literally type into Google data preprocessing for AI models and you have everything there. But this is just like a comprehensive view to tell you exactly what steps are taken to preprocess this data. And some examples of this include maybe cleaning conflict data to make sure there's no duplicates. So you'd have to sit and manually look at all of the data and then realize, okay, this is kind of where the duplicates lie. We don't need those. We just want a simple estimation, nothing too overestimated for conflict solutions. Maybe even standardizing all the terms needed for a peace treaty. So analyzing how effective different treaties are, or turning the textual data from social media into numbers. So saying this is how many likes this post got because of this comment on a post, for example, or this kind of overarching theme of the post that was created, to maybe see where there's supportive communities for peace education activities. Anything sort of like this will be very essential in pre-processing the data, but that highly depends on where you want your model to go. So along the lines of kind of thinking about your scope, then collecting it, that's when you pre-process. It might be that you don't have anything to pre-process and that everything is already cleansed, there's no duplicates, it's all in columns or categories, and then it's just transformed straight into the tool, which is very, very easy. But it's just a good kind of side note to remind you. And then looking at the idea of actually how do we take our data now and put it into a machine learning tool. So machine learning methods, like we said earlier, they basically allow us to look at these data sets that we input. For example, treaty data, inner peace data, meditation data, and looking at how these methods can be crafted into patterns that human analysts might not see. Things like conflict hotspots, assessing effectivity of peace measures, and tracking social attitudes towards peace. So the little bits of data that are slightly too complex for humans to take on board or slightly easy to miss. And so these machine learning tools can kind of solve that issue. So the sort of steps to take into actually crafting and figuring out which tool you need to use consists of actually choosing the right tool. So just like how we need to choose the right data, the tool really kind of lines up into what sort of data we're looking at. And then including all of the data that you've generated on like other slides and train that based on the data that you kind of set. So changing your parameters, changing everything to make sure that it links and works with the machine learning tool. And then testing the predictions of the model against different data sets and looking at how we can refine those, seeing based on the performance. And so this is just a little chart to compare the different machine learning tools that exist in this world. Naturally, this is quite a technical kind of concept, but if you genuinely kind of Google these different tools and click on the links to them, you have exact websites that you can pinpoint or further research. Again, you can use further AI-based models to actually help you learn this stuff. This is just made as a sort of overview. So the first tool will be natural language processing. So as the tool says, it literally processes natural language. So it's a machine learning AI-based tool that can take any human kind of language via text, via video, via voice, and turn that into insights. And what we call it in the world of artificial intelligence is sentiment analysis. So seeing the emotions behind what humans are saying to turn that into insights, which is such a clever idea. You can simply speak into these models and they will generate and produce a different prediction in terms of how humans are speaking. They can detect different emotions and understand, okay, this is what's kind of going on, and the underlying reasons that are being mentioned that are not necessarily easy to read between the lines, essentially. So an example of where this is used in peace building, looking at examining transcripts and documents from peace negotiations to see if there's any specific conflict areas where there could be analysis performed to see the areas for peace building. And then another example is a neural network. So similar to how the brain kind of functions with neurons, the same thing can occur in technology. There's literally different networks, like branches of hierarchy, that means we can actually classify data based on where the kind of decisions are made. So in this case, we could look at analyzing patterns of conflict data and forecasting any sort of escalations to prevent them from going on based on the data that's been provided. So it's very much kind of categorical and then turned into further trees, in which we can see the hierarchy of where something is going to happen or not. And then another example is a decision tree. Similarly to how we think, it's basically the idea of replication of our brain to identify specific patterns, because humans love to see patterns and maybe don't believe in coincidences all the time. So that's sort of where the decision trees come into place. And they look at analyzing deeper conflict dynamics and pinpointing very specific parties involved. So if you want to know exactly where the conflict is happening and how it's happening, and how we can actually use these peace results to be incorporated in there, and actually how effective the peace results are too into these dynamics, that's where we can use the human brain replication of decision trees. And then support vector machines. These are essentially different hyperplanes that will categorize important data points. So there's like different planes of data. It's more of a 3D sort of structure that means you can categorize your data based on visualizations and looking at recurring conflict pattern data and performing the highest function of decision-making processes. So this is kind of the most complex in terms of peace building, and will provide exact kind of details on how something will occur and how it can be implemented as effectively, because it uses a very 3D hierarchical structure that's not necessarily applicable to everything else. And then finally, random forest, which is a sort of assemble machine learning technique with decision trees. So this is another step on top of that, where this time, instead of having hyper-specific sort of thinking processes, it's more there's capacity for larger data sets for peace building investigations to be inserted as input data that can then churn it out into higher and more complex quality output data to see exactly where we can forecast maybe conflict patterns or maybe inner peace style, to see the exact distinctive features of replication, to see exactly how something is not peaceful and how we can turn it into something very peaceful. It can apply to seriously anything. It does not just have to be in the sense of conflict physically. It could be internal, could be external. So these are all very good tools that have no specific focus at all, but can be applied and have very different usage policies for different generation of AI models. Then looking at exactly how these different models are developed. So we've thought about figuring out exactly where we want to go, have a scope ready, figured out the sort of data we want to collected that data, cleansed it, processed it. We've chosen our tool now, and now it's about how can we build this sort of AI model from the back of our tool. And so the actual definition of a model, it's not exactly a machine learning tool. It's more we are using machine learning tools to craft a model. So this is where it kind of gets more interesting, because it's the data that you've inputted directly and you're making something new, because it's not just a copy paste of data that exists already. And so to develop a model, it's essentially the art of building computer algorithms that can learn from the data we feed it to actually make predictions. It's all about predictions. And therefore, we can make these algorithms from these different machine learning tools. So it's a step after, essentially. So not to be confused with a machine learning tool. And like we said, there's different kind of models. So those are the outputs of what we use from the machine learning tools. And then we can actually have specific features that are then chosen in line with the model built. So it could be something focusing just on economics, seeing how peace building affects economies, or how meditation affects our human brain, or looking at past war severity. So something that's kind of quantifiable or kind of you can choose as a category essentially. And this is just a simple little diagram to showcase exactly the different sections of machine learning. So we have supervised learning, unsupervised learning, and reinforcement learning. This is not something to be totally worried about. It's more just to show that there are different sectors to machine learning, more branches, and how the different versions of learnings of these machines can actually lead to different outputs. So it's more just to show that there's different trees, just as a graphic, but nothing to go over too deep. And then to actually choose the model, you have to select your sort of technique. So like we looked at the machine learning tools. So identifying which one you want to use there, actually training the model now, putting in your data, then setting up the hyperparameters. So saying this is exactly what we want to focus on in terms of the data we've given you as relation to Peacebuilding. And then of course, validating the model and testing, which is a very, very key point. And sort of going on to the very last bit now is the idea of evaluation iteration. So once you've taken your data, you've put it in, it's now very important to have a sort of evaluation and iteration section. So you've looked at the idea of taking your data, putting it into the model directly on the platform, because once you've sort of clicked on these different artificial intelligence machine learning tool models, you can click on the actual tool and input the data directly. So you can do a little Google search, find all of the machine learning tools you want, clicking on it, and it will tell you the requirements. That's the beauty of it. You don't need to code anything yourself. So you'll be able to input your data in via Google Doc, for example, or via a Word document, and then, attaching that onto the document, into the tool, and then allowing the data to run. So you'll have an output of some sort, depending on what you're kind of focusing on. But now you need to think and sit back and realize, how effective is this artificial intelligence model, and how effective will it be to contribute towards Peacebuilding? So it's really essential that we continuously iterate to make it effective and reliable. And of course, dynamics in this world are going to change all the time, particularly in relation to AI and to conflict and to peace. So in order to make sure it's very, very kind of good and optimal at predicting the different conflict scenarios in terms of peace building, or for predicting inner peace ideas, then it's really important that we have consistent iteration and change and evaluation. So in terms of evaluation as a definition, you're basically analyzing what the outputs are for these AI models against what we know they are, and then seeing how that differs and if that is going to be to a good standard or if we should change it. Then in the sense of iteration, it's about improving the model depending on what is produced at the very end. So it could be things like fine-tuning, changing the different models, looking at adding different sections or more data, less data. It's really dependent on what is required and what your personal output is. And to get a step-by-step format, because it's nice to have all the different kind of views there. In terms of evaluation, you want to define your criteria to evaluate for. So you need to say, what am I looking for? Why am I doing this evaluation? And seeing how accurate this kind of model is maybe, or how fast the recall is, or checking the F1 score on the scale, and seeing the model function during Peacebuilding. So setting these parameters, saying, does it function as I want it to? Put yourself in an external person's shoes or in your target audience shoes. And then testing your predictions against sort of recent conflict data or inner peace data to see its relevance. Then using a very specific validation model called a k-fold cross to see its performance, to see if it performs to the speed that other AI models do, or that kind of the data available does. Then you can also kind of look at collecting feedback from Peacebuilding experts, because it's good to know the technical side, but if you're not kind of speaking to your target audience, it's not really going to be as effective in terms of implementation. Then in the sense of iteration, looking at evaluating the performance using metrics and feedback. So maybe having a parameter where you're like, so once somebody has used this AI model, maybe send me a notification to say how many people have used it, or to see how they interact with it, using sentiment analysis, maybe seeing how the actual audience member has clicked on the questions or answered something. Like I said, modifying specific parameters, adding additional data to stop any biases, and then continuously repeating just to make sure that you're always up to date, maybe once every month with all the data, or once every 2 weeks, depending on the style of data, particularly if you're focusing on conflict. And then naturally, once you've built this artificial intelligence model, it's really important to make sure that you're engaging your public and audience with this idea to show them this is exactly what artificial intelligence can do, and to target your audience and to say, this is a model that you can use to actually effectively encourage peace building. So one example could be looking at workshops and webinars, for example, like this, promoting peace to showcase the actual AI technology that could be used to increase trust and awareness. If people don't know about the technology and it's not explained well enough, people will be scared. So it's really important to kind of engage the public in a positive way. Collaborating with local communities again to refine these AI models, to actually allow people to have a piece into your work and to make it as effective as it could be, particularly if they're your target audience. Even looking at local media partnerships for credibility. If it's in the news and people see it, that's where you'll pique interest, and it's also a form of marketing. And then also generating some effective social media campaigns, things like videos, reels, promoting the role of artificial intelligence, having you go through it, having a peace building person go through it. Something that's really, really kind of simplistic to the general public, but as effective as possible. And then naturally, once you've engaged your public, you want to know, is the AI model actually having a good impact in the world of peace building? Some ways you could do this include conflict incidence reduction. So, for example, looking at, if you're focusing on a peace building model that wants to reduce conflicts, looking at the frequency and intensity of conflicts in certain locations after you've successfully installed your AI peace model into that community or that area. And again, could be applied to human health. It could be how effective has the AI model kind of been in reducing inner peace, or reducing inner conflict rather, and improving inner peace, and promoting positive thoughts. In the sense of community engagement, it could be involved with the idea of impacted communities being actually measured as a result of AI tech. So, for example, questionnaires and forms, naturally looking and solidifying the idea of ethics as well, getting approval for these kinds of things. And then also potentially looking at the sustainability of peace agreements. So seeing how, if any, during kind of a longer period of time perhaps, have there been changes to peace agreements in a positive light? Has there been different alterations as a result of the work with your AI peace-based model? And these are sort of the final kind of references at the very end, and just to provide a comprehensive overview of everything we've looked at, and to explain how we can actually use AI very, very effectively for peace building. And it doesn't have to be for one specific sector, but rather a larger kind of group of peace building efforts. So it could contribute to anything in relation to that, as long as you have the correct data and correct sort of style inputted, correctly cleaned sources, and correct model as well chosen, and a machine learning tool. So it's really important to kind of follow these steps in order, and then to actually execute on the idea of crafting an AI peace building model. I hope this has been very helpful and has put into perspective what AI can actually do for peace building, and how you yourself could take initiative from these, click the links, read the references, and then actually make a difference in the world of peace building. Thank you so much.